coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
You know, it's kind of like a war of attrition. I mean, you've seen this with Ukraine, where the party elites in the U.S. thought, oh, you know, Putin won't escape this time. We'll take all of his money away and you crash his economy. And fast forward a couple of years, and he's like, well, no, I'm just grinding this one out, and time is on my side. So the upshot of all this stuff for me is that, as frightening as it is to see the regime behave in all of these insane and calculated and damaging ways, it really looks like time is actually not quite on their side as much as advertised. And that might explain why the Biden administration is racing to just kind of turn the government into an AI operation that can be easily wokeified by telling the one supercomputer to just wokify everything. But beyond that, in the real world of normal politics, it really seems like if there's one person who has time on their side, once again, it's Donald Trump.
Welcome, everyone, once again to the American Minds Editors and Publishers Podcast, The Roundtable. I am your sometimes host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute, publisher of the American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. Spencer is traveling somewhere, and so you are joined by Seth Barron, managing editor of the American Mind, and James Bullis, editor of the American Mind. Well, the Trump trial is now, not to beat a dead horse, I know we've talked about this a lot lately, but it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving content-wise, aided by third parties, which we'll get to in a minute. But the Trump trial has now concluded. The jury is in deliberation. The closing arguments were, I think, yesterday and went on. I think the defense went for about 2 hours, and then the prosecution went for nearly 7 hours, I think. Maybe it was 5. It was a long day in the Manhattan courthouse. And one surprise, although it wasn't a surprise, the content of it was a surprise. But apparently the Biden campaign wanted some sort of, I don't know what they're calling this now. I mean, after the last 4 days of them saying that Biden will address this issue from the White House instead of at a campaign event once the conviction is handed down, whatever it is, and that it being at the White House means it won't be quote unquote political. And of course, it will be very serious. Biden will get to discuss the state of democracy. Meanwhile, they've sent down Robert De Niro to Lower Manhattan to comment on this case. So, I mean, this is a recurring feature of our modern life. God help us, which is you all remember in 2016. They do this. The Hollywood's best and brightest or most concerned liberals occasionally do this white background, earnest montage of all of them warning you about Trump's threat to democracy. They did in 2016. I'm sure there was some 2020 version. It may have been a little more truncated and a little sadder. But De Niro was in one of those, or maybe it was Martin Sheen at the very least. Representing the old guard of sort of politically active Hollywood, I suppose. Martin Sheen's always attractive to them because he's, of course, the former president from the West Wing. I don't know why they think, even in 2016, why half the electorate would even recognize Martin Sheen as some quasi-presidential figure, given how long it's been since the West Wing was on the air. But anyway, De Niro was down in Lower Manhattan, and it was kind of a weird spectacle. It was this odd mix. You know, De Niro, who is an actor for a living, is down to give a very important speech and sort of presser in his own mind, I'm sure. Safeguarding democracy, warning everyone about Trump. And yet maybe it's just a function of age. Maybe it's kind of a function of this long running criticism of De Niro, which I wasn't actually that familiar with, that he's kind of just a hack playing a very, very narrow range of the New York guy, the New York tough guy in various different settings, diverse settings, from Analyze This, where he's sort of doing the same shtick as a psychiatrist or psychologist, all the way to his normal mobster stuff. But De Niro So anyway, with that background and that expertise, you would think that De Niro could deliver a pretty impassioned, full of pathos, serious warning to his fellow citizens down there. It kind of went off the rails from the beginning. Of course, there's a large hostile crowd down there, pro-Trump crowd. So they were yelling various obscenities at him. He was delivering this short speech, given sort of fumblingly from stapled together 2 or 3 sheets of paper. I mean, at the very least, anyone who does any public speaking, even if you do it from paper, you don't staple them. You sort of have them loose leaf so that you can turn them over fairly adroitly. It was just had all the trappings of amateur hour, which you think, I mean, the man isn't a politician, but I mean, public rhetoric or a certain type of it is his specialty. So maybe De Niro's just getting old. At one point, he was reacting to the crowd as he walked back to his car after this announcement and presser that sort of landed with a thud, in my opinion. The optics of it were not great. A car alarm was going off when he was trying to deliver his remarks. So it was Manhattan was kind of unconsciously conspiring to be very Manhattan and flustering De Niro and interrupting his very important presentation. And then, so he's walking back to the car and people are, as I said, yelling obscenities about Biden. And De Niro says, you're all gangsters. You're all gangsters. He's swearing back at them. So the whole thing is just a sad and undignified spectacle. The only couple of moments of real, or feigned, I suppose, he's an actor, pathos and passion were when he went off his little script. That all was pretty flat. But then it was very Hollywood-esque. He was reading from the script and then he would pause and look up and sort of say repeatedly with emphasis, if he gets in again, he will never leave. And then he looked, he will never leave. He will never leave. That was maybe the high rhetorical and acting point of the whole thing. I mean, among other things, I just wonder who does he think the audience is for this? Who does the Biden campaign think the audience is for this? I mean, a nearly octogenarian. I forget how old De Niro is.
He's 80.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. He's 80. It looks good for 80. Seems pretty with it still mentally, but he's certainly lost a step. This sort of thing is so politically flat-footed and rhetorically flat-footed, and it's just the opposite of a good media event. Even if you took out all the hostile crowd and the beeping horn and everything else, it just as a matter of communications discipline, the whole thing I found was very odd.
Well, there's been this crazy collapse in the celebrity value of the Democrat brand. I mean, other people have pointed this out that, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, they had every A-lister essentially at their beck and call. And now they've got like Mark Hamill and Lizzo and Robert De Niro, all kind of like doing these like half-hearted, terrible performances. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before. The night before Trump's inauguration in 2017, I went to a rally like held outside a Trump building in Midtown, and Michael Moore was there, and the usual crowd. And De Niro gave a speech, and he was like, he also was reading from stapled papers then, and he said, "Trump is so dumb. If Trump came to Nobu, like De Niro's fancy sushi restaurant, he probably wouldn't know what the sushi is. He would be like, why is this not cooked?" And it was just like so tone deaf. And it was like, oh yeah, Bobby De Niro, the real tough guy, the man of the people, bragging about his sushi restaurant. Moreover, I'm sure Trump has eaten sushi for probably 50 years or whatever. Everything about that appearance was like total buffoonery and hilarious. My 2 favorite moments were at the beginning when people started heckling him and he sort of gestured at them and sort of indicating that it's because of Trump that people are so rude nowadays. And Biden made a similar remark a while ago when he said that like he was going through some town in Pennsylvania and he saw a little boy give him the middle finger.
Yeah.
And he was like, that's not who we are. Like, look what Trump has done to us. I also liked that, when De Niro said, he was saying, Trump's not a man. He's probably never punched anyone in his life. Now, okay, De Niro like grew up in Greenwich Village with like a gay artist dad, and he was like this meek little artsy kid. So, I mean, you know, it may have been like kind of a little, it may have been a tough time, but this idea that like Biden said the same thing too, like, I'm going to punch Trump, I'll take Trump behind the gym and beat him up or whatever. This weird, like, what are they talking about? Like, why is like, since when is like punching someone in the face like this high value? I mean, I guess it's like this weird projection. Like, De Niro probably never punched anyone in the face. And I believe Biden probably beat people up, but I'm sure it was like 8-on-1. He's got like a real bully thing. Everything about that was like ridiculous and hilarious. Like I said before, they're kind of now trotting out the types of celebrities that Republicans traditionally trot out. You know, like Scott Baio. I guess now Dennis Quaid is stumping for Trump. But you know, there might be more. I guess Mike Tyson was wearing some kind of Trump shirt the other day.
Yeah, Richard Dreyfuss has been in some hot water recently because he, well, not recently, it sort of resurfaced, but he went on, I forget whose podcast he went on, maybe a year and a half ago, and said some, unsolicited things about trans madness and all the rest.
Yeah.
And so, now maybe, this would be the flat-footedness of Republicans, right? To ask Richard Dreyfuss, which anyone under 30 has probably never seen on the screen, maybe even under 35, to trot him out to some event.
Yeah, to me, the spectacle of this weird, flat-footed attempt at making political hay out of the trial, which they could have done earlier. They didn't for some reason, and now they're sort of trying to put it together. And aside from just the fruitlessness of putting De Niro up there and hoping to make some kind of real political play out of it, I mean, it speaks to this larger issue of like, this is a moment of, pretty serious and comprehensive crisis in the United States of America. And many people feel a sort of high-tech version of what you can see all the way back in the 1800s, when Tocqueville described Americans as always anxious that time is sort of slipping through their fingers and they're never going to be able to sort of stably secure the goods of everyday life until they're old and it doesn't matter anymore. These things run pretty deep, but now more than ever, I think when it comes to identifying potential winners, and Americans still like a winner, so they're looking for some sign of what the future is going to look like according to who seems best positioned, and a lot of that has to do with this feeling of is time on this person's side. And you look at Donald Trump, and he's leaner noticeably. He's sort of skin tone has been color corrected a little bit. Time seems to be on his side. Despite his advanced age, he seems to be, getting a little bit younger as the days go on. And time is certainly not on Biden's side. You see De Niro up there. Time's definitely not on his side. And it's been fascinating to see, we touched on this a little bit last time, where the lawfare against Trump seems like a pretty good strategy. We'll just throw the kitchen sink at him. We'll grind him down. We'll make sure that, it's a slog all the way to the election and through the election. And until the end of time, the long arm of the law will never, Donald Trump will never slip away. He'll never get away. Seems like a decent strategy. And it's obviously very alarming to see our system of law and governance abused in this way, because it doesn't just stop with Trump. Of course, it goes to other people and even people who, you put a bad meme on the internet and now you're going to jail. Like, this is insanity, and it's worse than insanity. It's premeditated and calculated dismantling of things that many Americans died in order to preserve. But on the other hand, Trump is sort of playing this game for time himself. And to a degree, he's like, okay, how about this? I don't even really need to campaign. I could go out there and do stadium tours like last time. But guess what? While I'm sitting here in the courtroom having like based memes drawn of my face by the court illustrator, my poll numbers are going up and yours are going down, and I'm eating into your base. Time is on my side. It's kind of like a war of attrition. I mean, you've seen this with Ukraine, where the party elites in the U.S. thought, oh, Putin won't escape this time. We'll take all of his money away and you crash his economy. And fast forward a couple of years, and he's like, well, no, I'm just grinding this one out, and time is on my side. So the upshot of all this stuff for me is that, as frightening as it is to see the regime behave in all of these insane and calculated and damaging ways, it really looks like time is actually not quite on their side as much as advertised. And that might explain why the Biden administration is racing to just kind of turn the government into an AI operation that can be easily wokeified by telling the one supercomputer to just wokify everything. But beyond that, in the real world of normal politics, it really seems like if there's one person who has time on their side, once again, it's Donald Trump.
Yeah. There is this weird, like, Trump is like anti-fragile. Like, the more you hit him, the harder he gets. He's like some
Lindy.
What's that?
He's Lindy, I think.
Yeah. It's funny. But you know what I want to say about that press conference before we move on? Remember the other element of the press conference and who De Niro was introducing are the January 6th police officers like Fanone and Harry Dunn. And you know what? The image of Fanone standing there, like tatted up, like he's an Aryan Brotherhood member with those like crazy, like spiderweb tattoos up and down his neck and on his arms. I don't know, like, okay, I understand, like, maybe if you're already like compelled to think this guy's a hero, that's great. I didn't really see the imagery as working. But the other thing is, it's like, this is what the Biden campaign comes down to, talking about, like, their biggest accomplishment is something that happened before he was president, which is like the January 6th, like, charade and like all of the trials. So having these, here's the thing about Capitol Police. Okay, yeah, they were in a riot, but whoever told people who joined the police, oh, you're never going to be in a riot. You're never going to have to do crowd control. Do you know how many cops were injured during the 2020 riots? Like tens of thousands, some of them seriously. So, but for some reason, like, they keep focusing on these guys, like this is like the worst thing that's ever happened, and that they literally saved the nation, which is what Biden said. It was just funny. And about putting Trump in jail, I mean, don't forget Lula spent 18 months in prison, and he's president of Brazil again. So it's not clear to me, I mean, I'm not so sure. It's like, it's probably a year ago, it seemed like a great idea to have this trial. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if they're kind of like wondering what exactly, it's, it's like a dog chasing a car. Like, you get it and it gets it, and then what's it going to do with it?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It seemed funny to me.
Our dearly departed senior fellow and friend Mike Ullman, mentor to many, died back in late 2019. And Mike had a wonderful Ullmanisms throughout classes, some of which he sort of pillaged from great historical wits, and he would admit it. I'm not saying he'd pass them off as his own, but I think this was original to him, which was, he probably half stole it from somebody, but that's fine. We all do it. And he said, Ullman's first law of historical causation, it seemed like a good idea at the time. That seems to be what's going on. The other thing too, I mean, maybe we're making this too complicated. I asked, this seems so odd. Why would they do it? And both you, Seth, and James hit on it, I think, which is it's an act of desperation. I just quote the first 3 paragraphs from this morning's Politico piece. One of these big, long, multi-reported pieces from 3 different authors. Dems in full-blown freak out over Biden. A pervasive sense of fear has settled in at the highest levels of the Democratic Party over President Joe Biden's re-election prospects, even among office holders and strategists who had previously expressed confidence about the coming battle with Donald Trump. All year, Democrats have been on a joyless and exhausting grind through the 2024 election. It's a been a Poulos theme for a while, just the grind of it all. But now, nearly 5 months from the election, anxiety has morphed into palpable trepidation, according to more than a dozen party leaders and operatives. And the gap between what Democrats will say on TV or in print and what they'll text their friends has only grown as worries have surged about Biden's prospects. You don't want to be that guy who's on the record saying we're doomed, or the campaign's bad, or Biden's making mistakes. Nobody wants to be that guy, said a Democratic operative in close touch with the White House, and granted anonymity to speak freely. But Biden's stubbornly poor polling and the stakes of the election are creating the freakout, he said. This isn't, oh my God, Mitt Romney might become president. It's, oh my God, the democracy might end. And, go check the rest of that out if you want a little peek into the inside. I'm still skeptical of the collapsing prospects of Biden's reelection. We have a long way to go. We've all said this before in different ways. I see this more as a kind of, when your ship is listing to one side to correct it, this is an old Churchill analogy about consistency in politics. You run all the way to the other side so that you hope you'll get the keel back to even. I think this is a bit of that rhetorically. They're sounding the alarm now because they still hold out pretty good prospects that they'll fix it all. The difficulty is that their candidate, as James and Seth have indicated already, is not getting any better. In fact, quite the opposite. So, everyone's in a race against time. And I think the fear has begun to settle in on the left. We'll see. I just wanted to flag this De Niro spectacle, encourage people to talk about it amongst themselves. It doesn't seem to bode well for the state of affairs on the left. Now, speaking of Trump and his daring and vitality, despite his age, Trump went like Muhammad to the mountain, to the Libertarian Party convention. So Trump and RFK Jr. both made a bid to be the Libertarian nominee. They both failed, but Trump gave a sort of fun speech. I encourage everyone to watch it. He knew he was going into hostile territory, and he kind of played them pretty well. He started out with a bunch of boos and everything, and he mocked them a bit. He said, you can nominate someone besides me if you want to keep getting your 3 to 4%. But if you want to win, you should come with me. And then he sort of built up to defending cryptocurrency, and topic that James has talked a lot about. I mean, Trump didn't put it this way, but advancing some semblance of a kind of, at least the spirit of a digital bill of rights as technology changes and graphic processing units and the ability to have custody of and keep your cryptocurrency and blockchain products, et cetera, is going to be increasingly important in our surveillance age. And the federal government is working both in its regulatory apparatus and some motions from particular congressmen and senators on the left to kind of get a handle on it and substitute a central bank digital currency in its stead so that they can control it, all under the guise, of course, of stopping terrorism and drug trafficking and money laundering. But there's a lot more going on than that. So Trump, promised to protect crypto, and then he's, I guess, his crescendo of sorts. I kind of skimmed the speech. I didn't listen to the whole thing word for word, but his crescendo, at which point he had most of the room on his side, was that he promised to free Ross Ulbricht if he was elected, which Ross has been a martyr of the digital libertarian wars, swept up in a federal sting of some sorts. But James probably remembers better than me the details. I don't know that they're that important, but I just thought it was fun. It's something. So just in a study of contrast, if you had some similar thing on the left, you could see it really not being something that Biden at this point in his career and declining rhetorical prowess could pull off in a analogous setting on the left. Yet Trump did it with some gusto and with a smile on his face, and I think endeared himself to some folks on the right and maybe even some libertarians. I will say that, of course, neither RFK Jr. nor Trump, I think I said this already, got the nomination. A guy named Chase Oliver got the Libertarian Party's nomination, former Georgia Senate candidate, I guess. Just to give you a sense of the continued sad saga of the Libertarian Party. If you've never heard of Chase Oliver, neither had we. The other candidates, he got selected on the 7th ballot. Dear listeners, do you recognize any of these names? I didn't. Aaron Avuris, Antonio Gagnon, Bo Lindsay. That sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't know. Charles Belay, Charles Griffith Ferry, and David Andrew Saber. Those were the the contenders for the Libertarian Party convention. I'll just end on one final note, which is that in typical Libertarian Party convention, presidential convention fashion, the chair of the party, I think he was, opened the proceedings, or at least before Trump spoke, by stripping off his suit down to a vaguely risque, slightly BDSM undergarment, and that was it, dancing around. So I guess some things change in our post-Cold War democracy, but the dedication to the Libertarian Party of beclowning itself, at least in its major every 4-year convention, stays firm.
And let it be pointed out that Trump now accepts Bitcoin. So the wheels are turning, folks. And at the same time that Trump is making this move and invoking the name of Ross and really extending himself into that realm pretty confidently, we have a Libertarian Party who's headed by a gay HR professional who likes to wear his COVID mask, is okay with the vaccines and supports puberty blockers and hormone injections for kids. So our political categories that we seem to remember in some cases fondly, in some cases not so much, from the 1990s. Some of them have proven to be quite resilient, but others have melted away. And I think it's revealing that the Libertarian Party now appears to be split between sort of Mises Institute folks on the one hand, and basically, characters from South Park on the other hand. A house divided cannot stand, and I'm not sure that libertarianism is going to be a thing by the time we make it to the next presidential election cycle.
I mean, I don't have much to add. I mean, I can't. Whenever I hear, or every time I hear anything about the Libertarian Party, it just confirms to me the sense. I just picture them as like the table in the back of the lunchroom where the kids who wear their parkas year round and play with fidget spinners sit. It's hard to like take them too seriously. I mean, I guess sometimes they do get like 3% of the vote. I guess it's like a protest vote. They don't really seem to have a very coherent program. I know they think that they're very consistent, but it ultimately doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. For a long time, it just seemed like they just wanted like legalized pot. But now that pot is pretty much legal everywhere, I don't know what doesn't that take the wind out of their sails? But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we should state for the record, of course, that we have many libertarian friends who are more serious. No, I said, but much more serious than the observed denizens of the every 4-year convention. So that should be stated for the record. But
granted,
yeah,
there's just a lot of there's a lot of pressure on those libertarian principles, partly because of events just seeming to outpace the standard sort of classical libertarian prescriptions, and partly because people keep looking for the exits, whether they're moving right or moving left. There's RFK out there. He doesn't seem to me to be any more idiosyncratic of a political figure than Chase Oliver, and he was rejected by the Libertarians. So it's there are a few true believers out there still. I trust that they will go on making well-constructed arguments in support of their positions, but gosh, this just seems like a time that is particularly cruel to the libertarian holdouts.
Maybe it was like 4 years ago or 8 years ago, I watched the convention, and the question came up like, well, would you, or maybe it was a debate, but for the presidential nomination, and they were like, well, how do you feel about driver's licenses? And this one guy was like, no, what's next? Do I need a license for a toaster? So, I mean, it's just like very, I don't know. It's hard to take them too seriously.
Yeah, it's And, we all empathize. I mean, well, plenty of right wingers had their libertarian phase at, 16 to 18 years old, but then you think you'd move on. I remember fresh into college at Hillsdale arguing to who later became a very good friend, but a sort of non-traditional student who was a philosophy major. I was fresh off the boat, maybe 2 weeks into college. And he was one of the RAs, or I was roommates with the other sort of older RA in the small dorm in Hillsdale, and I said something stupid about not legislating morality, and that was the beginning of my education away from thoughtless libertarianism. Yeah, producer Jake points out that in the chat here that maybe the funniest thing about the convention is that Getty Images doesn't have any pictures of the actual nominee, Chase Oliver, but they've got tons of Trump and RFK. Yeah, I mean, that's just, normal good media coverage. I mean, why would anyone care? I found one picture on Wikipedia, but again, first time I ever laid eyes on the guy. Anyway, watch the speech. It was kind of fun. Or, if you're a certain type of junkie for this sort of stuff, which many of our listeners are, along with us. I wanted to bring up this, people, I think some of our audience is getting tired of hearing about Gaza. So let me talk about a lighter side of it. Although it's kind of gallows humor lighter if you consider the full implications of it. But this is a headline from The Independent from yesterday. $320 million U.S. pier in Gaza breaks apart days after supplies began arriving in war-torn region. So, I mean, it's just so perfect. I wonder what it really suggests. I mean, what immediately came to mind is, for some reason, in my free association thought about this was the bullet train tracks to nowhere in California, Newsom's and the California Democrats project, which has, exceeded its budget already and has built, dozens of miles of track over a planned full span that will go, at last I checked, at least from San Jose to San Diego, which is 550 miles, give or take change. So it led me to wonder, I mean, also it's on top of the fact that I forget what one of these Biden assessments from the center left journalistic world in recent weeks talked about, Biden's main achievement, or what he thinks is his main achievement, part of the Bidenomics whole plan to seek, working and middle-class white votes, among others, or really just working and middle-class votes, full stop, was the infrastructure bill. And if you look at the state of the billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that were allocated in that bill, they don't have much to show for it now, 3 years later. And so it just shows this theme keeps cropping into my head. I put in mostly private print to people, this weird mix for the modern federal government of malevolence and aggression in some ways, incompetence and profligacy, all at the same time. So all these left-wing infrastructure projects, I mean, the military used to be immune from this sort of criticism because, after all, they're on the bleeding edge of where you need real competence. The Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera, have just had this long track record of getting things done quickly. That has fallen apart. Those cracks began to show, I think, post-Hurricane, or really in the lead up to Hurricane Katrina, when it turned out that the Army Corps of Engineers were partly at fault for some shoddy stuff that led to more of the flooding than otherwise should have happened. But now you have it with this pier in Gaza. I mean, it opens for a few days and then starts breaking up and will become an artificial reef of some kind if they can't cart it all away in the coming years. And then, the bullet train in California and all these infrastructure projects. So it's the patronage side of, not that the Gaza pier is that really, unless I guess you throw in military contractors and it's further clients of the Democratic Party these days. But the whole patronage apparatus of the federal establishment, which is by default Democratic because of the leanings of the bureaucracy and the partisans of kind of government projects, often, it all seems to be breaking down. That seems to be a good sign to me, because it must inevitably degrade the ability of one party, which is the party of the establishment, more than not, to be able to affect its schemes and pay off its patrons and make up for other deficiencies in order to help it stay in power. So this all seems like a good development. I mean, less aid to Israel is not great. I mean, the embarrassment of the spectacle of this nine-figure bridge pier, which is now fallen apart in the Levant. I don't know what to make of all this. Maybe I've covered the whole waterfront, but it's amusing in a gallows humor way, I say.
Well, we have a really good piece, going up Wednesday night by Joel Kotkin and Wendell Cox about the whole question of American infrastructure and the cost overruns, the misplaced priorities. But just one thing they point out is this move to net zero and to, green energy and all of that. There's $7.5 billion allocated to building a huge network of electric vehicle charging stations. But so far, they've only built 7 stations. But, I guess because you have so many different stakeholders and constituencies that you have to answer to, labor, you have to make sure that you're seeking qualified minority and women businesses to build them. You have to pass environmental reviews. There's a whole series of barriers, like social and ideological barriers to doing anything in America. So it's okay. This was built off the coast of Gaza, but I'm not too surprised, I guess, that it fell apart. No, I don't know. Maybe. Do you think China could have built a better pier?
Well, at this point, the Chinese robots can probably build anything better than whoever is subcontracted to put infrastructure projects together. I mean, look, the difficulty that you described in patching together these weird constituencies and interests that are fragmenting these days in pursuit of some kind of common basic goal, whether it's infrastructure week, which was relentlessly mocked, or what we're seeing now with the Biden administration. But even the administration itself is now so divided, especially around Iran and Gaza, that I wouldn't be surprised if whoever it was who was sent to blow up Nord Stream was dispatched by some faction of the administration to go sink its own pier setup.
I don't know about that, James, but I know you were tongue in cheek. And I wondered too if I was a little too sanguine about what this portends for the strength of the patronage network on the left. Because while Seth was talking, I was thinking, well, I mean, the final product may not be being cranked out very quickly. So actually, the real people that are being hurt are the supposed beneficiaries of these projects, that is, the American people at their various spots of stressed infrastructure across the country. But it's entirely possible that even though not much has been built on various projects, that people are still getting paid. So my judgment that this is a failure of the patronage network might be premature.
I mean, in New York City, for instance, to build a few subway stops a few years ago, I think it comes out, it's basically like $1 billion a mile. And they did, a whole study looking at the similar cost in Europe. And now we think of Europe as being completely saddled and anchored by unions. But in fact, they can do things about 10 times cheaper because, yes, they have powerful unions, but the unions are sort of integrated into the process in a way that they're not here, where basically everything is just seen as like a huge money grab.
Mm.
There's still, for instance, like there was the Times did an analysis of, this wasn't the subway, but it was essentially like connecting the Long Island Railroad to Grand Central Station. And like union rules from the year 1900 still obtain. So you need to have, it's required that you have 2 guys on site as like oil can workers, like the guys who squeeze oil into but these don't exist. There's no need. The technology doesn't mean it's a meaningless position, but you still have to have them there. And these probably average out to $150 an hour with benefits and overtime and everything, but good luck getting rid of it. So yeah, it seems like a real, seems like kind of a shame that the country that, I don't know, built the Empire State Building in 16 months, like can't do anything these days.
Yeah. Just another product of, well, it's a one piece of it maybe is the product of the breakdown in social trust. The counterexample that comes to mind is there's this video online that I'm sure many people have seen. I think it's like a 12-hour time lapse of what looks to be about 2,000 Japanese workers basically moving a track a few feet somewhere, elevating it a little bit, and basically rebuilding an entire subway station in Japan in 12 hours flat, and the train running again in the morning. So quite a study in contrasts. And then again, Japan, which is I'm woefully ignorant on this, so I can't comment on the power of unions in Japan, but it's a pretty corporatist place. So I'm sure it's just another example like Europe of where, they're just different, organized differently in some ways, but more integrated and efficient for whatever reasons. It seems like those things should be studied and written up, and then we should learn from them and fix them. Well, we wanted to wrap with trying to do a slightly shorter episode today because our dear producer Jake is in the middle of moving from one state to another, so we want to give him time to get that all done. Well, Seth wanted to talk about Biden visiting his daughter-in-law, which is odd given the upcoming, that is Hunter's ex-wife, given the upcoming trial of Hunter. And it seemed to Seth to be some species of, it glanced at some species of witness tampering, who knows. But we'll skip over that and just see what everyone's reading real quick. We encourage you all, as we do every week or almost every week, to read the damn site. That is AmericanMind.org. Seth, what are you enjoying right now?
Well, I guess I brought it up already, so I may as well continue with it. Yeah, Joel Kotkin and Wendell Cox have an excellent piece called Why Johnny Can't Build. America's Prosperity Demands That We Build for Our Future. And they basically just hit on these same things we were just talking about. Here he says, the more recent decline of the West's productive capacity, China now boasts as much industrial export as the US, Japan, and Germany combined. Has many causes, including insufficient investment and blah, blah, blah. But, overregulation. And I'm just, maybe this sounds a little mean-spirited, but I kind of feel like the problem with our assignment, the focus on minority and women-owned businesses and all of that, it kind of feels like that's like a tribute that has to be paid on everything. So you automatically have to add 10% on or 15% on to the cost of doing business, essentially, in this kind of tax, and then it just slows everything down. Anyway, that's not something Joel really gets into, but it's a very good piece. So I would recommend you read Why Johnny Can't Build, Joel Kotkin and Wendell Cox.
Thank you, Seth. James, what are you reading?
Get The Closing of the Internet Mind by Aaron Kheriaty and a host of co-writers, many of whom, or at least several of whom, are part of the censorship working group over at Brownstone. It can be tough to keep up with the pace of events in tech. Even just what's going on in so-called AI alone can be overwhelming, even for someone who has taken on the burden of trying to follow the pace of events. This is a great overview of kind of where things stand and why, especially when it comes to online freedom, which is not just speech, it's also association. And if you want a quick rundown that catches you up to speed on where the internet stands, Donald Trump himself, as the piece points out, complained that in some places they were, quote, closing up the internet. Well, it's accelerated since the 3 years ago that he said that. Give it a read, The Closing of the Internet Mind.
Excellent. Thank you, James. And I'm reading, I just want to keep pointing people back to the refreshing feature, which is getting refreshed with new pieces occasionally, on Jeremy Carl's book, the latest installment. So if you go to features, it's the top one on Jeremy Carl's new book, The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. We just had a little salon here in Dallas on that topic, which I just came to today. So the buzz keeps going. Jeremy did Allie Beth Stuckey's show today. That's why he's in Dallas. So look for continued media from Jeremy. He's been doing a lot of podcasts, and so seek them out. And various different types of podcasters too. So, if you want to go hear him on Alex Kashuta's podcast, you can. Allie Beth Stuckey, I just mentioned, and others. I told him he needs to get on Red Scare, which is on his radar too, which would be fun. But anyways, my long-winded way of saying, just look at Lafayette Lee's new piece called The Way Forward, a glance at Jeremy's book, and with an honorable mention of our colleague Chris Caldwell's book, The Age of Entitlement, that in many ways opened the door for a lot of this stuff. And Lafayette Lee, it's just an interesting example of engagement on the right and the sort of online intellectual writerly right, and how newish coalitions are continuing with some durability. And, Lafayette Lee, forgive me, sir, it's not his real name, of course. Forgive me, sir, if I'm misrepresenting you, but I get the sense that is more of a paleocon by temperament and intellectual inclination, but has high praise for Jeremy's book. And even, gentle treatment even of Jeremy's encomium to the founding principles and how they might present a way forward for us. So for one more new take, it's a brisk read, not too long. Continue to look at that feature on Jeremy Carl's book and look at The Way Forward by Lafayette Lee. All right. Well, that'll do it for us today. We're going to let producer Jake off a little early. Thank you all once again for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to follow our work, go to AmericanMind.org, like we just mentioned. Claremont.org. If you want to support our work, go to Claremont.org/donate. If you want to catch up on what the gents in DC are up to on policy advising and papers on the battle of ideas as they apply to the intersection of policy and ideas, especially on issues of racial identity and identity politics and education and Black Lives Matter funding and all the rest, go to dc.claremont.org. And then, of course, our flagship publication just dropped. The new Claremont Review books is online as of yesterday. Will be in mailboxes in probably 10 days or so, featuring, among other things, if I can tease it for you all. It's currently paywalled, so you should subscribe if you really want to read it now. Charles Murray reviewing Steve Saylor's new collection, Noticing, among other gems. Christopher Caldwell on Israel and other stuff like that. Go to ClaremontReviewBooks.com for that. If you like the show and you're a first-time listener and haven't done it, or sometime listener and haven't done it, please review it, rate it, pass it around, help us spread the word. And thank you all, as always, for listening. Talk to you next week.